Jacob decided to surprise his parents that year. He was a sophomore at Lewis and Clark University in Portland, and he had convinced his mom that he was going to stay there for spring break. But that Friday, he showed up at home to spend the whole week with his family. Now, it should have been a great week, restful, relaxing. But Saturday night, as he walked home with some friends, a man pulled up, demanded to know Jacob's gang affiliation, and shot him 3 times before he could answer. That was homicide number 12 last year in San Francisco. By year end, there had been 68 others. There were 108 rapes, burglaries, assaults, thefts. All in, for every 100,000 people in the city, there were more than 5,000 crimes. And that was right at the U.S. average. But there are men and women working really hard on this. More than 1 million officers and $50 billion in operating budgets. And these are the numbers that we hold our police departments accountable to. Crime per capita is their net income. This is their main success metric. Great, right? Well, actually, there's a really big problem with that. See, crime is impacted by all sorts of things outside of a department's control. Things like population density, education, income. As a result, our main way of measuring the success of a police department isn't actually very good at telling us how they're doing. As such, our departments are out there doing pretty dramatically different things, financially, strategically, tactically, with no real way to say what's working and what isn't. This time last year, while I was still in consulting, I had the chance to partner with Dallas Police Department to tackle this problem. And after 6 months of combing through annual reports, of doing a lot of statistical analysis and interviewing chiefs and officers across the nation, we were actually able to start to isolate some of the impact that police departments do have on crime. And what we uncovered was a fascinating story about incentives and impact. At the highest level, a police department can spend its resources in 2 very basic ways. You've got crime response. Now, these are things like your 911 response teams and your entire investigations unit. And then you have crime prevention, which is things like your community engagement and all your patrol officers. Now, besides crime per capita, we actually hold our department strictly accountable to a couple other measures. One of the main ones is response times, which is how long it takes an officer to get to your door after you call 911. But what's really true about that as a metric? Well, it's entirely crime response oriented. And sure enough, we hold our departments almost exclusively accountable to the crime response side. But what we uncovered as we started to isolate that impact was that it's actually a focus on crime prevention that's really making a difference. And as our standards on these metrics have gotten higher and higher over time, we've essentially created a system where we're forcing our departments to prioritize the side of their business that doesn't contribute to the bottom line. Now, this tension is very real on a day-to-day basis. Imagine with me that you're a patrol officer. It's 11 p.m. and you're on your beat in your neighborhood. You've been on assignment here for over a year and you've actually really gotten to know the community. That's actually why you're here tonight. One of your contacts called. There's a little bit of unrest, some unresolved dispute, and potentially a high chance of violence. Now, crime prevention at its very best, you're out there, knocking on doors, meeting with community members, keeping the peace. And then your radio goes off. There was a theft a couple blocks down. It's nothing serious, maybe a couple iPods, a PC, but someone's just called it in because they need a police report so they can file for insurance. Now, you don't want to go, but now that that call has come in, that response time clock is ticking. And you know it's going to show up in your review. And that's going to show up in your sergeants and his lieutenants. So you go. And when you get there, you get another call. And then another. One officer I talked to described this as being a slave to the radio. Now, who knows what happened back in your neighborhood that night? Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe that was Jacob's neighborhood. Maybe it was that night. You wanted to be there, but unfortunately, you had a job to do. This is the tension between crime response and crime prevention. And too often, it ends up being a tension between making the grade and making an impact. So, how do we fix it? Well, let me tell you about Chief Ed Flynn. Chief Flynn is one of those grizzled old men of the law. He's all right angles, whether it be his personality or that freshly starched uniform. This is a guy who probably belongs in Gotham City. But in 2008, he landed in Milwaukee as a new chief of police of one of the nation's most dangerous cities. Now, Chief Flynn made it clear on day one that prevention is his big priority. See, the chief believes in what he calls the 60-10 rule, and that's that 10% of criminals in neighborhoods are responsible for 60% of crime. His message to his officers was crystal clear. Know your 10%. Find the underlying issues beneath these pockets of crime and solve them, root them out. And things changed. In his first year, the number of traffic and pedestrian stops in Milwaukee doubled. But during the same time period, the number of tickets written was actually cut in half. See, officers were being proactive with their community, but they weren't chasing tickets. They were building relationships. This wasn't stop and frisk. This was stop and ask. How are things going? How are things in your neighborhood? How can I help? Especially in those 10%. First, even though there were so many more interactions, the number of citizen complaints that year actually went down. Then crime plummeted, especially when you control for some of those variables. From 2007 to 2011, crime went down everywhere in the US by about 15%. In Milwaukee, it was more than 30. That's 30% less burglaries, 30% less theft, 30% less murder. But what's crazy is if you go back and you read the newspaper headlines from this period, you get a completely different narrative. Response times go up in Milwaukee. And that's the rub. The metrics that we have in place are at best incomplete, but they're probably just wrong. Sure, Chief Flynn can plow through it by sheer force of personality. But what about the rest of our departments? We need change. We need a new paradigm for thinking about policing. For our city halls and our chiefs, that means redesigning these metrics such that they're aligned with the department's mission, metrics that reinforce prioritizing the right things. But that's not all. See, in those cities that I saw where they were really having an impact on crime, prevention was never just a department activity. It was a partnership with the community, with us. The fact is, there's something that every single one of us in this room can do as well. An engaged community that views the police as a partner is the most powerful tool in fighting crime. So what I'm asking is really pretty simple. As community members, as community leaders, get to know your departments at home, at work, at school. Learn what their priorities are. Know your 10%. And ultimately become a partner in prevention so that you can help your departments stop fighting crime and start stopping it. Thank you.